The Honourable Ed Fast, Member of Parliament for Abbotsford, British Columbia, joins me now to talk faith values and the future of Canada. Welcome to 100 Huntley Street, MP Fast.
Good to be on your program.
We're so thankful that you're joining us today, and we're so thankful for the work you have done to protect Canadians. You've advocated for laws and different measures to protect minors from online luring, to protect those who might be able to access medical assistance in dying due to a mental illness. You have done so much work to protect the lives of Canadians. MP Fast, why is that so important to you?
Well, I feel that these initiatives that I've been privileged to bring forward and actually champion are really an outgrowth of my faith values. And I love being in Ottawa, in the seat of power here, helping to shape our country, shaping policy, shaping the laws that will govern us. So it's quite a privilege to be here and do this work for, well, it's over 18 years now.
Yes, incredible. Incredible journey. And I know so many of our viewers on 100 Huntley Street are so thankful for the work you've done in the fight against medical assistance in dying for those who have mental illness. You introduced Bill C-314 into the government, and that went back and forth as a challenge to stop MAID from being accessible to Canadians whose only sole underlying condition is mental illness. What was that journey like for you and the change we recently got to witness?
Well, when the Supreme Court of Canada actually compelled Parliament to act on medical assistance in dying and said it is a right that has to be legislated, I was very concerned and actually voted against the legislation originally. But it passed, it was implemented, and then as subsequent court decisions came along, it became very clear that Canada's MAID regime was expanding and expanding. And what was happening is exactly what we had predicted, which is we had stepped on a very steep and slippery slope. They were sliding down that slope. And now we're at a point where even the mentally ill in Canada could be euthanized. And clearly those who are the most vulnerable in Canada, those who are disabled, those who can't fend for themselves, are at greatest risk from the long arm of medical assistance in dying, which is effectively assisted suicide. So I decided to bring forward a bill that would arrest this so-called progress in expanding assisted suicide in Canada to the mentally ill. And what it did is it provoked a discussion in Canada and within Parliament on whether this is how far Canada should go. And even within the governing Liberal Party, it provoked discussion, and there was a fair bit of disagreement and dissension within the caucus, and it effectively compelled the Prime Minister to put off for another 3 years the implementation of MAID for the mentally ill. And of course, I'm hoping that a future government will actually totally rescind the expansion of MAID to include the mentally ill.
Well, as we saw your bill come forward in Canada, 100 Huntley Street began to advocate with viewers, asking them to contact their local MPs. And knowing that only about 51% of Canadians even knew about MAID being expanded for those who have mental illness as the sole underlying condition for application of MAID. So when we began to petition Canadians to write into their MPs, we saw an incredible response. And you're right, even among party lines, people aren't comfortable with this idea of euthanizing the most at-risk, marginalized people in our society, potentially. When you think about Canadians who are struggling with disabilities as well as mental illness, not being able to access the supports they need, what do you think we can do to support one another in that journey?
Well, that's the real rub in this whole issue. Many of those who are considering, contemplating, or actually applying for medical assistance in dying are doing so because they're not receiving the mental health or social supports that they expect they would receive. from Canada. And if that's the case, we are truly failing Canadians, that people are actually resorting to death as an escape from their existence. We need to provide hope for Canadians, that they can be healed, or that they can at least be restored to a point where they will again have the joy of life, where they'll be able to have a satisfying life and look forward with hope to the future. And so my bill was just one step in the process. I do believe that we're going to have to do a complete reevaluation of how we serve the most vulnerable in our communities.
Yes. And I think faith groups, those faith groups in the tradition of following Jesus have so much impact in terms of helping those who are most marginalized. When we look at community outreaches, churches, when you think about, everyday Canadians, what could we be doing to help those who are at risk around us?
Well, what we can do is, first of all, provide them with the hope they need. I think there's a role for government to play in enhancing the services for the most vulnerable. Mm-hmm. Those are some of our disability groups. Another group that we haven't even talked about is our Indigenous communities that are at greatest risk of an expansion of assisted suicide in Canada. And providing them with the basic services they need, whether it's drinking water, whether it's drug treatments, whatever it is, we need to provide that base level of service that will give Canadians the hope they need so they don't have to consider death as the final alternative.
Yes. And in your reflections, even in recent articles, and I've seen you say that Canada is moving from a culture of life to a culture of death, but we can move to a culture of life together again as we pursue hope and share hope with one another. How does your faith in God impact the work you do every day serving Canadian citizens and wanting to bring hope to them?
Well, perhaps I could share with you an anecdote that happened when I was first elected back in 2005. I remember election night, we had a party, celebratory party, and a man came up to me and said, "Mr. Fast, now that you've been elected as our member of Parliament, I hope you're not going to Ottawa to shove your religion down people's throats." And he stuck his finger into my chest. And it took me aback initially. And then I responded just by asking a question. I said, "Sir, I want to assure you that I'm not going to Ottawa to force my religious beliefs on anybody. But let me ask you, which of my faith values do you want me to leave behind when I go to Ottawa? Is it compassion? Is it reconciliation? Is it justice? Is it forgiveness? Is it loving your neighbor as yourself? I just can't leave those faith values behind, and I want to tell you, they will inform all of my decision-making on Parliament Hill." And I think that changed his perspective on what I was there to do. Yeah. We don't live in a theocracy. We live in a parliamentary democracy within a secular society. And I think it's incumbent upon us as Christians to live out our faith winsomely within the marketplace of ideas, and to do so in a way that hopefully brings honor to the name of Christ, the person that we serve.
Yes. And in serving Christ, we know that so many of us have these moments where we feel like our lives do need to be surrendered to Him and we need to live for Him. Was there a moment in your life where there was a turn in that way, or is your faith in Jesus something that was with you from a young age, growing up in a household that served God as well?
Well, I grew up in a home that honored Jesus Christ, but my first faith journey started when I was 9 years of age, when I knelt beside my bed and acknowledged my sinful nature and my need for the saving knowledge of Jesus Christ. And I invited, as a child, in that childlike way, I invited Christ to come into my life and to change me. Now, that hasn't led to a perfect life, I can assure you. But I've had an incredible faith journey over the years where even in times when, I faced my own challenges. I know that God was always there, prompting me, guiding me, encouraging me. And the way we're encouraged, of course, as Christ followers, is, of course, to be rooted in God's Word. And we can never read God's Word enough, but being rooted in God's Word makes a big difference. And the older I get, the more I realize how important that is in a Christian's life.
MP Fast, that's so inspiring to hear your personal journey, and to sit here and get to talk about the impact that you've had on our nation with God's principles of justice and love and mercy and protection of life. As you think about the future of our nation and the generations to come, what is your hope and prayer for Canada today?
As I think of the generations to come, I hope when they aspire to leadership, that won't only be power that motivates them and influence and prestige. I hope that there's a commitment to servant leadership, which is distinct from leadership as a general concept. A servant leader puts the interests of others ahead of their own. And placing the nation's interests ahead of personal interests, I think, is really important for servant leaders, but also placing the interests of your neighbor, as the Bible instructs us to do, is really important, because it allows us to make decisions that benefit the family, the community, the country, and also builds those that we are ministering to, and into whose lives we're speaking into. So that's my wish for future generations of Canadian leaders. I'm spending a fair bit of time now mentoring the next generation of leaders. A number of them are also MPs in the House of Commons today. There's something that is truly satisfying in my career, is to see that next generation take up that mantle of leadership in that way.
Well, MP Fast, I'm so thankful for who you are and for your principles and for what you've stood for and stand for in Canada. Thank you for protecting Canadian families. Thank you for caring for Canadians and making such a difference in our nation.
Thank you so much.